Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world of mud-slick roads, smoky thatch roofs, and hearts that beat under layers of wool and desperation. You're not a knight or a princess. Nope, you're a peasant. And love. It's going to be rough, itchy, and probably smell faintly of cabbage. You squat beside a pigsty, age 13, and already your mother's hinting it's time to start thinking about a match. Which is hilarious, considering you've never even seen your own reflection clearly. Your only mirror is the surface of the millpond, and it's usually rippling too much to tell if that's your nose or a very bold wart. Your dowry? One chicken that still pecks your shin and a half sack of oats that mysteriously shrinks every week. Not exactly the stuff of romantic legend. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, post your location and local time in the comments, because nothing bonds us like collective insomnia. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the village path in shoes made of stitched scraps and ambition. Life smells of damp straw and boiled onions, and your heart skips whenever you pass the weaver's daughter, Millie, with the lopsided braid and slightly terrifying stare. You think it's love. Or indigestion. Hard to tell. But there's a problem. Her father wants a dowry, real stuff. Like linen. Maybe a cow. You don't even own your own spoon. In medieval England, peasants married young, not for romance, but for survival. Marriage was about fields and children, not feelings. Historians still argue whether most peasants had any real choice in whom they married, or if village pressure just rolled over everyone like a cart with no wheel brakes. Still, your heart insists on writing poetry. You scratch a love note into bark with a chicken bone. It's terrible. Rhymes smock with rock, and compares her smile to a fresh turnip in moonlight. She doesn't reply, which is fair. When harvest season comes, you find ways to walk past her family's cottage. Too bad you're always hauling manure at the time. Not exactly swoon-worthy. One day, your uncle tries to help. He elbows you at the fire and says, you need to show her you can provide. Like, offer her something useful. A goat hoof, maybe. You try it. She says thank you, then throws it at your head. Still, progress. There's a village fair once a year, and you're told this is your moment. You wear your least dirty tunic, your hair slicked with goose fat for shine. The fair is all noise and mud and people shouting about cheese. There's even a puppet show. It's terrifying. You spot Millie near the ribbon dancers. She's laughing. You walk up, heart thudding like a drum. Then, disaster. Your foot hits a rut and you land face first in a pie stand. Millie laughs harder. You wish you could evaporate like morning dew. After that, you sulk for 3 weeks and try to date Marjorie instead. But she has scurvy and throws up every time she smells dried fish, which is unfortunate because you smell like dried fish most days. Still, you persist. Because this is the medieval dating scene, 2 people with bad teeth and worse prospects trying to find joy between fieldwork and dysentery. It's not like you have privacy. You share a one-room hovel with 5 relatives and a goose named Raymond. Any romantic gesture is guaranteed an audience and commentary. One evening, you think you'll impress Millie with your dancing. It's a harvest celebration, and the cider's flowing. You're doing your best with a hay jig, flailing your limbs like a windmill in distress. She watches, expression unreadable. Then turns away. You keep dancing, but now it's just sadness with rhythm. Fun fact, many medieval peasants didn't marry until their mid to late 20s, largely because they had to save up just to afford setting up a household. Thatched roofs don't thatch themselves, you know. Your dreams of young love are squashed under economic reality. And yet, love still tries to bloom. A quiet glance while washing clothes. A joke shared while gathering firewood. An extra chunk of bread, accidentally, left near someone's bowl. These are the small sparks. The problem is, your entire life is overseen by the church, and the church has opinions. You can't marry your third cousin. You can't marry during Lent. You can't even hold hands too long without rumors starting. Historians still argue whether local priests enforced these rules strictly or just grumbled and looked the other way. You write another love letter. This time, it's on the back of a fish scale. You slide it under Millie's firewood. It reads, "You smell better than dung, and I like your chin." Bold. Direct. She smiles at you the next day. Or maybe it's gas. Things are looking up. Until your father decides you should marry Gertrude, the cooper's daughter, who owns 3 pigs and has never smiled in her life. Gertrude glares at you over porridge and picks her teeth with alarming force. You think of Millie and consider running away. Then you think of the weather, the wolves, and how you get winded climbing stairs. You stay. Romance isn't about candlelight and poetry. It's about surviving winter with someone who doesn't hoard all the blankets and maybe only smells mildly like radish. In the end, Gertrude turns out to be kind. Stern, but kind. She gives you half her bread without being asked. She even tells you your ears are not the worst in the village. You swoon a little. Love in your world is slow and accidental. It's a shared bucket. A patch of dry straw. A half smile over pickled beets. It's not perfect, but it's yours. And that's how it begins. You spend the next morning hauling water from the village well, your arms sore, your tunic damp from an unfortunate splash involving a slippery chicken. But it's worth it, because you know Millie goes to the well every other day, and if you accidentally end up there too, maybe she'll notice your new hair twist, crafted with sheep grease and misplaced confidence. She shows up right on time. You lean casually against the well wall, trying to look like you aren't leaning casually. She glances at you. You nod. She nods back. Ah yes. The medieval mating ritual in all its awkward glory. In a world where Tinder doesn't exist and love letters are etched on bark or carved into barn doors, flirting means gestures, little gifts, lingering glances, and saying just enough without making the other person die of embarrassment. You offer her a leek. A slightly less wilted one, even. She accepts it with raised brows and an amused smirk. Score. Mainstream historical fact. For many peasants, vegetables were more than food, they were symbols. A leek might symbolize strength or virility, weird flex, but okay. And young lovers sometimes exchanged them along with simple tokens like ribbons or handkerchiefs, if they owned any. Your friends mock you mercilessly. You gave her a leek, says Bert, the miller's son. Why not just offer her your left boot and call it eternal devotion? You ignore him. After all, his idea of courtship is yelling compliments at passing girls from hay carts. He's not exactly an authority. You and Millie fall into a rhythm. You time your chores to hers. You start complimenting her oxen. Very symmetrical. She laughs. You think she might be impressed, or possibly horrified. Hard to say. Still, you manage to make her laugh again while pulling weeds near the communal garden. You joke about turning into a root vegetable if you have to eat one more turnip this week. She snorts. That's basically a medieval swoon. Historians still argue whether peasants had time for real courtship or if most romantic interactions were squeezed between planting cabbages and dying of something unpronounceable. But you make the time, because this awkward, muddy dance feels worth it. You build up to giving her something more meaningful, a stitched pouch, made from leftover linen scraps. You don't even prick your finger while sewing. Much. Inside, you hide a few goose feathers, because, well, you thought they were soft and maybe symbolic? You're not sure. You're really winging this. She accepts it without a word, but keeps it. That's all the encouragement you need. Soon, you're lingering near her cottage, helping chop firewood, by coincidence, and finding excuses to mention how strong your thatch repair game is. Then, one evening, she invites you to walk with her to the edge of the forest, to gather mushrooms. This is basically medieval code for, I think you're tolerable. You try not to look too eager, but inside, your heart is performing a Morris dance. The forest is quiet, except for birds and the occasional squirrel judging your every move. You crouch together near a mossy stump, your hands brushing as you both reach for the same mushroom. You apologize, she doesn't move her hand. Time stands still. Or maybe your knees just lock up. And then, her younger brother jumps out from behind a tree, yells, "B.O.," and ruins the moment entirely. You pretend to be unfazed, but you definitely screamed louder than he did. Millie laughs until she wheezes. You decide it's charming. Quirky tidbit: some medieval villages had matchmaking festivals where people, especially the unmarried, could mingle. But many simply used seasonal chores and church attendance to scope out potential spouses. It wasn't formal, but it was something. On one hand, this rustic simplicity sounds romantic. On the other, you're perpetually itchy, sunburned, and sleep in a straw bed that occasionally wriggles. Nothing like fleas to keep your love life humble. Still, things are progressing. One evening, she brings you a small loaf of rye bread. Not only is it still warm, it doesn't even have pebbles baked into it, a rare and heartfelt gesture. You sit together on an overturned bucket and split the loaf, your shoulders just barely touching. Just as you think you might risk saying something bold, like, "You're my favorite human I've ever seen," with soot on her cheek, her father appears. You jump up, accidentally appending the bucket. He narrows his eyes. "Well," he says slowly, "if you've time to court, you've time to help patch our roof." So, you do. In fact, you patch the heck out of that roof. You patch it like it's your calling. And maybe it is. Medieval fathers had significant say in their daughters' marriages, especially among peasants, where economic survival depended on who brought what into the household. Your reputation, your ability to work, and whether you once stole onions as a child, which you deny to this day, all factor into whether you're seen as suitable. But you're in. Kind of. Her father still squints at you, but he doesn't chase you away with a pitchfork, so that's promising. You start dreaming of the future. A shared hut. Maybe a goat. Maybe 2 goats, if fate is generous. You imagine long evenings by the fire, though realistically, it'll be short evenings and a smoky fire that makes everyone's eyes water. Still, the heart wants what it wants. And yours. It wants Millie. Even if her laugh sometimes sounds like a sneeze and she calls you "hayforbrains" with alarming frequency. But that's how you know it's real. You've been courting Millie for weeks now, or months, really, if you count the time spent pretending not to court her. Your neighbors have started to notice. Old Widow Brathwaite mutters, "He's up to something," every time she sees you near Millie's fence. But in the eyes of your fellow villagers, you're practically betrothed. All that's left is surviving the ritual of bundling. Now, bundling sounds like something cozy, like swaddling in blankets by candlelight, which it kind of is, but also not. You've heard whispers of it since childhood, how couples in some villages get to share a bed before marriage. Scandalous, right? Except there's a catch. One or both of you is wrapped tightly in cloth, like a human turnip, to prevent anything improper from happening. Nothing says romance like being sewn into a sack. Millie's family follows this tradition. So when her mother gives a nod of approval, along with a look that promises death if you misbehave, you find yourself nervously brushing straw from your tunic, readying for your first bundling session. The bed is a wooden frame stuffed with lumpy straw and possibly an old boot. You lie stiffly, your limbs already starting to cramp. Millie climbs in next to you, fully wrapped, except for her face poking out like a scowling carrot. A candle flickers on the windowsill. The shadows stretch like nosy ants. You both stare at the ceiling and say absolutely nothing for several eternally awkward minutes. You try to make a joke. You know, if I sneeze in this thing, I might pop a seam. She snorts. Progress. Mainstream historical fact. Bundling, especially in parts of medieval Europe and later in colonial America, was a real practice, meant to allow couples to bond without, bonding. Whether it worked. Historians still argue whether bundling actually curbed premarital relations or just added an odd layer of textile-based denial. In any case, you're grateful for the experience, even if your arm falls asleep and you dream about a goose judging you in Latin. The next day, the village whispers like geese during a thunderstorm. Someone saw you leaving Millie's house early that morning, your hair all askew, a bit of straw dangling from your hood. Your mother pulls you aside. You'd better marry that girl soon, before the whole village thinks you've made a mess of things. You try to explain the bundling sack. She isn't impressed. The pressure mounts. You start feeling like you're halfway between two worlds, one where you're still a free man with no pigs to your name, and one where you're about to become someone's husband, possibly while still owing her father 6 firewood bundles and a repaired wheelbarrow. You attempt to speed things along. You offer to help Millie's family with their fields. You bring them eggs. Real eggs, not even cracked ones. Her father nods with mild approval. Her mother gives you an extra crust of bread one evening. That's practically a proposal. But then, disaster. One evening, the candlelight strikes your face at just the wrong angle during bundling. Millie suddenly asks, "Did you always have that mole?" You pause. Which one? She tilts her head. The one shaped like an angry fish. You try to laugh it off, but the moment shifts. She seems distant. Suddenly, all your flaws come into focus. Your lopsided teeth. Your one strange toe. Your habit of nervously humming while chewing. She pulls her blanket tighter. "Maybe we should just slow down," she says. You lie in silence, the flickering candle mocking your crumbling confidence. Next morning, you're back to chopping wood with extra force. The other lads notice. "Trouble in paradise?" Bert says, chewing a turnip with smug satisfaction. "Shut it," you mutter, but it's true. Something's changed. You try to win her back. You leave a flower on her doorstep, a dandelion, but still. You try to compliment her oxen again. Nothing. Not even a grunt. And that's when you hear the rumor. Millie's cousin from the next village over is visiting. A cooper's apprentice with straight teeth and a horse. A horse. In your world, that's practically royalty. You catch a glimpse of him by the well. Tall, clean, suspicious. With sleeves that don't appear to be entirely patched. Millie laughs at something he says. That same laugh she gave you when you told her about the time you fell into a dung heap. You suddenly hate that laugh. Open scholarly debate. Some historians believe peasant relationships were quite pragmatic and short-lived, often breaking off with no fanfare if a better match came along. Others argue that emotional bonds were as deep and complicated as today's, just expressed through potato-stained gestures. You try not to mope, but you fail spectacularly. You take longer with chores. You sigh dramatically while feeding the pigs. You write another poem, this one angsty and full of metaphors about rotting turnips and heartworms. Eventually, Millie finds you by the stream. She sits beside you, says nothing for a long time. Then, softly, "He's not staying." You glance sideways. Oh, he's boring. Talks about barrel rings. You suppress a smile. Your oxen are more interesting. She nudges you with her elbow. You're still hafer-brains. But you think you're back in her good graces. Still, there's a lesson here. Love in your world isn't linear. It's messy, influenced by parents, property, pests, and the occasional mole in bad lighting. You lie back on the grass beside the stream. Millie hums softly, plucking blades of grass. You don't reach for her hand. Not yet. But it's there, close enough. That's good enough for tonight. So things are finally looking up. You and Millie have smoothed things over, the bundling incident has been chalked up to poor candle placement, and you've stopped writing tragic vegetable poetry. All in all, a win. But just when you think love might actually work out, here comes a new obstacle. One that wears robes, quotes Latin badly, and knows your sins by name. Yes, it's time to talk about the church. In your world, love isn't just a matter of the heart. It's also a matter of canon law, which sounds like something fired from a trebuchet but is, in fact, an extensive list of rules about who can touch whom, when, where, and how many cousin levels apart you have to be. And let's just say, you're not quite sure where you stand. Literally. You remember that your grandmother once mentioned your mother was second cousins with Millie's great-uncle's wife. Or maybe third cousins. Or fourth. You honestly have no idea, but you do know that Father Oswald frowns a lot, and you'd rather not give him a reason to start a sermon about consanguinity again. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, the Church officially prohibited marriages between people up to 7 degrees of kinship. That's basically everyone in a village. But over time, the rule was relaxed to 4 degrees, though most peasants couldn't count that far on their fingers without borrowing someone else's hand. Historians still argue whether these laws were strictly enforced in small villages, or if local priests simply waved them off with a grunt and a blessing if no one complained too loudly. But your priest is zealous. He's the kind who bellows phrases like moral turpitude and sinful fondlings from the pulpit. Last week, he gave a 40-minute lecture on why holding hands during Lent is a slippery slope to eternal ruin. You and Millie? You've definitely held hands. Once. Maybe twice. In a hayloft. After chores. Okay, it was 3 times. But still, not exactly the stuff of scandal. So now you're both more cautious. No more hayloft chats. No more mushroom walks unless there are chaperones, preferably elderly and prone to long naps. Still, the gossip mill never stops turning. Someone claims to have seen you two lingering improperly near the communal oven. You were literally waiting for bread. But it's enough for the priest to give you a stern talking to. Young man, he says, eyebrows wild like brambles. Do you understand the sacredness of chastity? You nod vigorously. Yes, Father. And the sin of temptation? Definitely. And the moral danger of proximity to unmarried elbows? Ah. Exactly. Stay 3 feet apart at all times, especially on feast days. You leave confused, slightly embarrassed, and deeply suspicious of your own elbows. But it's not just touch that gets scrutinized. The Church has opinions on when you can marry. Not during Lent. Not during Advent. Not during a holy feast week. Not on Sundays, or Fridays, or certain Wednesdays. Honestly, you're not sure there are any days left. You ask Father Oswald if there's a good window for a wedding. He says, well, assuming you've completed penance, abstained from meat on Fridays, avoided impure thoughts, and confirmed Millie isn't your cousin, you may apply for a wedding between mid-May and early June, excluding Ascension Day, Pentecost, and the Feast of St. Barnabas. You blink slowly. So, June 8th. That'll do. You rush home with the news. Millie's mother starts preparing. Your mother starts bartering with Aunt Rilke for a second-hand wedding smock. Millie just rolls her eyes and says, if you step on my toes during the dance, I'm marrying the Thatcher. Ah yes, the Thatcher, your romantic nemesis. His roofwork is suspiciously straight. His calves? Alarming. You hate him. But he's got nothing on you, because you've got commitment, and a mostly clean tunic. Meanwhile, the Church wants more than just scheduling control. It demands confessions, public declarations of intent, and an official witness. You'll have to stand at the church door one Sunday and announce, I intend to marry Millie, 3 weeks in a row, so the village can object if she's already promised to someone else, or you're secretly a werewolf. Quirky tidbit, the Church was obsessed with secret marriages. So much so that by the 13th century, clandestine unions, performed without witnesses or announcements, were outlawed. But people still tried. Sometimes love just couldn't wait for paperwork. You're not about to risk excommunication, so you play by the rules. Week 1, you stutter your way through the announcement. Week 2, you trip on your words and accidentally say you're marrying Muddy, which is a pig. Week 3, You finally get it right, and no one objects, unless you count the pig's loud oink. Things are almost settled. But just to be sure, you visit the parish clerk to double-check that Millie's lineage doesn't violate any cousin-based rules. He pulls out a scroll longer than your life expectancy and begins muttering names. You stand there, sweating. After 10 minutes, he squints at you and says, probably fine. That's the best you're going to get. So you and Millie keep your distance, publicly, keep your elbows covered, mostly, and keep your affection in check, barely. You dream of the day when the church will let you kiss someone without needing a papal dispensation. Until then, you'll practice patience, and maybe brush up on your footwork. Because next comes the wedding. And Millie, she will step on your toes first if you don't get it right. The sun rises on your wedding day with less fanfare than you'd hoped. There are no harps, no flower-strewn paths, and definitely no choirs. There is a rooster with a sinus issue and a cart stuck in the mud, but you take what you can get. You wake up in a cold bed, nerves tangling in your stomach like old wool. Your mother fusses with your tunic, muttering, "You only get married once, hopefully." She licks her thumb and tries to flatten your hair. You dodge. She misses. It's tradition. Today, you become a husband. Which means, among other things, you're about to inherit a corner of Millie's family hut, 3 chickens, and a leaky roof. Not quite a palace, but hey, real estate is real estate. The village gathers by the church door, where all peasant weddings begin. You're sweating. Not just because of the nerves, but because your wedding tunic is wool, itchy, and, let's be honest, tight in unfortunate places. Millie arrives with her hair braided, wearing a linen shift that's been whitened with chalk powder. She looks like herself, but more so. You grin. She smirks. It's romantic in the most uncomfortable, awkward way. Mainstream historical fact: peasant weddings were often short and sweet, held outside the church rather than inside. The ceremony focused on the exchange of consent, the "I do" of the day. If both parties agreed, you were basically hitched. Blessing, yes. Ball gown, no. Father Oswald clears his throat and launches into the vows. Do you, son of Thomas, known dunghauler and amateur beekeeper, take Millicent of the Weaver's Lane as your lawful wife? You say yes. Loudly. Possibly too loudly. And do you, Millicent, take this ambitious fellow to be your lawful husband? She says yes with a side eye that promises trouble. It's perfect. You're now officially married, before midday, no less. The priest claps his hands. You may share a holy kiss, provided it is brief, chaste, and witnessed by God. You lean in. She pecks your cheek. A goat bleats. Someone sneezes. It's oddly beautiful. Then it's time for the real event, the feast. Okay, feast might be generous. You've got barley bread, weak ale, dried apples, and a stew that includes something mysterious but edible. There's a patch of green for dancing and a fiddler who may or may not be drunk. He plays anyway. Millie's cousins decorate a makeshift arch with nettles and faded ribbon. It's itchy, but festive. You're handed a clay mug of cider and shoved into a ring of dancers before you can argue. Millie joins you, laughing, at your footwork, mostly. You stomp. She spins. You both nearly fall into the fire pit. No one minds. Quirky tidbit: in some villages, newlyweds were escorted to their marriage bed by a crowd of singing, shouting neighbors. Privacy wasn't a priority. Community was. Sometimes they even banged pots and made jokes while the couple sat awkwardly on the bed like nervous sheep. Thankfully, your village is slightly more civilized. Instead of a mob, it's just Millie's aunt who insists on sprinkling fertility herbs on your threshold while chanting something in bad Latin. You nod. She winks. You're not sure what's happening. Later that evening, you're finally alone in your half of the shared hut. The fire crackles. Your feet ache. Millie sighs as she unbraids her hair. You sit there, 2 exhausted peasants bound together by law, love, and livestock. Historians still argue whether peasant marriages were partnerships of affection or necessity. Probably both. After all, life is easier with someone to share the chores, the gossip, and the occasional infestation of mice. And here's the thing, you like Millie. She calls you haferbrains, but her voice softens when she says it. She swatted a bee off your neck this morning with a quick slap and no apology. That's love. You hand her a chunk of bread. She tears it in half. You eat in silence. And just when you think she might say something sentimental, she says, "If you snore like your uncle, I will sleep in the barn." Fair. You both crawl into bed, barely wide enough for two, definitely straw-filled, and not particularly romantic. But you're warm, and she's next to you, and you're not doing this alone anymore. Later in the night, you wake to the sound of rain on the roof and Millie muttering in her sleep. You think she says your name. Or maybe, turnips. Either way, your heart does a little jig. You've got a wife. A home. 3 chickens and a half-share in a compost pit. You're richer than you were yesterday. And tomorrow. Tomorrow you milk goats at dawn. Because this is love, medieval style. Not grand gestures, not moonlit balconies, but damp mornings, shared chores, and the quiet hope that neither of you gets dysentery this winter. As you drift back to sleep, you think, this isn't what the ballads promised. But it's real. And that's enough. Married life begins not with bliss, but with blisters. You wake to Millie elbowing you in the ribs because the goat is screaming again, which probably means it's eaten something it shouldn't. Again. You rub your eyes, pull on yesterday's tunic, and start your new role. Husband, provider, and part-time livestock psychologist. Your romantic dreams dissolve under the weight of early mornings, sour milk, and a straw mattress that squeaks every time you breathe. Still, you're hopeful. This is the next chapter. Love. Companionship. Domestic joy. And then you stub your toe on the chamber pot and accidentally knock over the last loaf of bread. It's a rocky start. Sex is, well, it's technically part of the marriage. The church insists it is, mostly because producing children is your sacred duty, second only to paying your tithes and avoiding the Thatcher's smug face. But no one really teaches you anything. There's no handbook. No helpful advice. Just whispered warnings and vague threats of hellfire if you do it wrong, or enjoy it too much. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval Christian doctrine taught that marital sex was acceptable, but only under strict conditions. Lust, even within marriage, was seen as morally dangerous. You were allowed to love your spouse, but not too enthusiastically. Yes, that was a thing. So you and Millie approach the subject like 2 nervous goats in a lightning storm. There's awkward fumbling, a lot of apologizing, and at least one unfortunate cramp. The straw mattress squeals like a dying duck. Somewhere outside, a rooster screams in solidarity. Afterward, you both lie there, staring at the ceiling, unsure whether you just created a miracle or committed a minor sin. Millie shrugs. That wasn't terrible. You decide that's a win. But intimacy is more than just straw creaks and whispered apologies. It's the daily rituals, the way she folds your tunic before dawn, the way you fix her bootstrap without her asking, the comfortable silence between chores. Still, no one said married life would be easy. Especially not when your neighbors are listening through the walls. Yes, walls. Thin ones. Your hut shares a beam with your in-laws, who are very interested in your progress as a couple. Millie's mother asks, over breakfast, "So? Any signs yet?" You nearly choke on your barley. You're not sure whether she means signs of affection or signs of fertility. Either way, you nod vaguely and go out to chop wood until your dignity returns. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval communities believed that if a marriage wasn't consummated within a certain period, it could be annulled, even if the vows were legal. In rare cases, witnesses were actually invited to observe the bedding night. Thankfully, your village only operates at medium nosiness. Still, pressure mounts. You and Millie start marking safe days on the calendar, if you had a calendar. Instead, you keep mental track of feast days, fast days, and farmer folklore about moon cycles and fertile cabbage nights. It's all very scientific. And then comes the visit to the priest. You're supposed to go for post-marital confession, just to make sure you're not enjoying marriage too much. Father Oswald peers at you over his candle, asks if you've remained modest in desire, and mentions that lust is a gateway to Satan's armpit. You consider responding with, define modest, but you're not suicidal. You nod solemnly and say you're doing your best to remain godly in all aspects of the marital bond. Millie, confessing after you, says, "He's trying. Poor thing." The priest gives you a sharp look. You both do 3 Hail Marys and call it even. Outside the church, the world goes on. There's fieldwork, mucking out stalls, patching the roof again, you're starting to think it leaks out of spite, and washing tunics with icy stream water that turns your fingers into frozen radishes. But amidst the drudgery, there are moments. She sneaks you a bit of honeycomb from the feast leftovers. You find wildflowers and leave them by her sleeping spot. One day, she throws a beet at your head when you're being annoying. It's oddly romantic. Historians still argue whether peasant marriages were affectionate partnerships or purely utilitarian. But living it, you know it's both. Love isn't grand speeches or courtly songs, it's surviving the daily grind together. Even if sometimes your spouse throws root vegetables at you. One day, you come home with a sprained ankle from an unfortunate pitchfork incident. Millie sits you down, scolds you for being clumsy, then brings you warm broth and grumbles while rubbing your foot. You wince. She says, "It's your own fault." But she keeps rubbing. Another day, she gets sick from spoiled lentils. You wake up every few hours to check on her. You try to cook. It's disastrous. She survives anyway. Love wins. You start to appreciate the quiet parts of being married, the way she falls asleep mid-sentence, how she hums while sewing, how she occasionally steals your only clean sock but denies it every time. Marriage is less about passion and more about endurance. And feet. So many cold feet. And while the church continues to hover, ready to sniff out impropriety at every turn, you and Millie carve out a little corner of happiness in the cracks. Not perfect, not noble, and definitely not poetic. But real. Besides, you've stopped worrying about hell every time she kisses your neck. Probably. You're still adjusting, still learning, still sometimes bumping heads when turning over in bed. But you're in it together. And really, what more can a peasant ask for? You're a few months into marriage when someone in the village whispers, "If your wife hasn't conceived yet, maybe you should see the wise woman." The tone is gentle, but the implication is sharp. You nod politely while suppressing the urge to mutter something very unchristian. The truth is, people are starting to talk. Not maliciously, just helpfully, loudly, and at inconvenient times, like during morning prayers or when you're trying to pee behind a tree. You and Millie have been doing your best. But best might not be enough in a world where your worth is measured in goats and offspring. So, after some debate, Millie says, "Let's go see Elspeth." Elspeth lives just beyond the village, in a leaning hut that smells of garlic, damp moss, and mystery. She's old. Possibly very old. Her eyes are sharp, her voice raspy, and her cat may or may not be part demon. You knock, and she greets you like she's been expecting this visit since the day you were born. She peers at Millie, then at you. Looking for a little help in the growing department? Millie nods. Elspeth smiles. Got just the thing. You're led into her smoky hut, where bundles of herbs hang from the ceiling like upside-down broomsticks. She mutters to herself while stirring something thick and purple in a cracked pot. You try not to breathe too deeply. It smells like boiled beetroot and regret. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, herbal medicine was often the domain of wise women or folk healers. They used everything from fennel to fenugreek in their tonics and teas, sometimes mixing in prayers, charms, or downright strange rituals. Some of it actually worked. Some, not so much. Elspeth hands you a small vial. Drink this before the next full moon. And keep a hawthorn twig under your pillow. You blink. What's it made of? She leans in. Mostly beet juice and goose droppings. You assume she's joking. You really hope she's joking. Millie takes the vial with a nod of thanks. You leave 2 eggs and a carved button as payment. Elspeth nods solemnly, like she's just brokered a deal with the moon. Back home, you both stare at the bottle. It glows faintly in the firelight. You drink it. It tastes like wet socks and sadness. Days pass. You sleep with a hawthorn twig under your pillow. You make love only during fertile windows, which, according to Elspeth's diagram, involve moon phases, barley soaking time, and whether the rooster crows twice before dawn. You try. You really do. But nothing changes, except your dreams are suddenly full of angry vegetables. Coincidence? Quirky tidbit. One fringe belief held that a woman could be made fertile by stepping over the grave of a newlywed or rubbing herself with blessed dew, collected on a May morning. Neither of these options appeals to you or Millie. Mostly because the only recent grave belongs to old Tom, and no one wants his energy involved. Eventually, you visit Elspeth again. She frowns thoughtfully. Might be your humors are out of balance. You nod like that means something. She pokes your belly. You're damp and cool. You need warming herbs. And passion. Millie stifles a snort. You glare. Elspeth hands you a sachet of spicy-smelling powder and instructs you to mix it into your porridge while thinking loving thoughts. You try. But the porridge ends up pink, and thinking loving thoughts while chewing pink porridge is hard. Still, you keep at it. You try to make Millie laugh more. You give her your last piece of honeycomb. You patch her slippers without being asked. But pressure builds. Every day, someone casually asks, "Any little ones on the way?" Even Bert, who still doesn't own shoes. You start to avoid gatherings. Millie withdraws too. You both feel the silent weight of expectation pressing into every chore, every shared glance, every empty cradle in the corner. Historians still argue whether infertility was blamed more on women or men in peasant culture. Technically, the church held both equally responsible. In practice, it was usually the woman who got side-eyed at the well. To her credit, Millie never blames you. She just grows quieter. So do you. One evening, while sitting by the fire, you finally say, "Maybe it's just not time." She nods. Maybe. You both stare into the flames. Later that night, you reach for her hand in bed. She doesn't pull away. Because this isn't about potions or goats or whispered judgments. It's about the quiet act of staying beside each other when things don't go to plan. Still, you keep the hawthorn twig under the pillow. Just in case. You're out feeding the chickens when you first hear the distant clatter of wheels and a bell ringing in slow, solemn beats. Then the shouting starts. "Bring out your dead." The words roll over the fields like thunder. You stop, feed half forgotten in your hands. The chickens scatter. Millie steps out of the cottage, pale, eyes wide. You both know what this means. The plague has come. It begins with rumors from travelers, entire villages abandoned, priests dropping dead mid-sermon, rats fleeing towns like they know something you don't. Then, a merchant from 3 counties over arrives with a cough and purple blotches on his neck. He's buried by sundown. Suddenly, everything changes. You used to worry about goats eating your socks or whether Millie liked your stew. Now you wonder whether your neighbors will be alive by morning. You hold Millie tighter that night. The hawthorn twig under your pillow feels like a joke. Mainstream historical fact. The Black Death swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, killing an estimated 1/3 to 1/2 of the population. It hit cities first, but rural villages, yours included, were far from safe. Rats and fleas don't respect class boundaries. By the week's end, the local priest is coughing. You start lighting candles to saints you barely remember the names of. Millie says a prayer every time she sneezes. The fear isn't just in your chest, it's in the air, the water, the dirt under your fingernails. And in the midst of it all, you finally start to get attention. Millie looks at you like you're the last stable roof in a storm. And you feel the same. Maybe it's the looming death cart or the daily funerals, but suddenly, everything that felt complicated is now heartbreakingly simple. You love her. You don't care if she throws beats or if her nose whistles when she sleeps. You just want her to stay alive. Quirky tidbit: one folk remedy involved strapping a dead toad to your stomach to draw out the sickness. Another suggested bathing in vinegar mixed with rose petals and reciting specific psalms backward. You try neither, though Elspeth claims she once cured a cough with boiled badger whiskers. You nod. Slowly back away. And yet, people still get sick. You help dig graves. You see a girl you danced with at May Day lying wrapped in linen, her feet poking out. You help bury your friend Alan, who once wrestled a pig for fun. You don't cry. There's no time. You and Millie start sleeping back to back, scared even to breathe on each other. The fire burns low. Food spoils. No one goes to market anymore. Historians still argue whether the plague brought people together or tore them apart. In your village, both. The baker shares what's left of his flour. The carpenter boards up his windows. Some turn to faith. Some turn to running. Some drink themselves into oblivion and hope they wake up healthy. One night, you hear sobbing near the well. It's a boy whose entire family is gone. You bring him inside. Millie makes him tea with the last of the herbs. He curls up in the corner and sleeps for 2 days. You don't ask his name. The next morning, Millie touches your arm. Her fingers tremble. I don't feel right. You freeze. You help her into bed, heart thudding like war drums. You press her forehead. It's warm. Too warm. You try not to panic. You've seen this before. You've buried this before. She whispers, "Don't let Elspeth put a dead toad on me." You almost laugh. You brew every tea Elspeth ever gave you. You burn rosemary. You sprinkle vinegar. You chant a confused mash of Latin, English, and panic. You stay up all night. And somehow, asterisk, she gets better. You don't know why. Maybe it wasn't the plague. Maybe the saints are finally paying attention. Or maybe she just refused to die out of sheer stubbornness. By the next week, the death cart stops ringing. People start coming out of their homes again. The chickens, somehow, are fatter than ever. Elspeth says it's a sign. Of what? No one knows. You and Millie sit on a fallen log one morning, sharing a bruised apple. She leans her head on your shoulder. You don't speak. You just breathe. You made it through. You finally wooed her, only to nearly lose her. But she's here. Your love story isn't pretty. It's patchy, dirt-stained, and smells faintly of garlic. But it endures. Through bad timing, bad dreams, and bad illnesses. One day, years from now, someone will ask how you and Millie stayed together. You'll smile and say, "We just refused to stop. That's it. That's all." The plague might be gone, but life in the village doesn't bounce back with a song and a maypole. It limps. Slowly. Suspiciously. Like a one-legged goose after a storm. You're grateful to be alive. Truly. But now comes the strange aftermath. Your neighbors are missing teeth, families, and basic optimism. Some huts are boarded up for good. Others hold more ghosts than people. And then there's Millie. She's survived, but something has shifted. She's quieter now, stares longer into the fire. You try to cheer her up with a particularly wobbly carrot, carved to look like a duck. She smiles, but the smile doesn't quite reach her eyes. So you do what you always do. Work. Chop wood. Feed the chickens. Mend things that barely need mending. You're chopping away at the feeling that you're not enough. Then one night, the thatcher shows up again. Yes, him. He's back in the village, fresh from another town that didn't get quite as plaguey. Somehow his face still looks smug, and his sleeves are cleaner than yours. Millie mentions him once, just once, and that's enough to unravel you. Now, you're not the jealous type. But also, you are. You start watching her closely. You note where she goes, who she speaks to, how long it takes her to fetch water. It's absurd. You know it. But the plague taught you that everything can be gone in a breath, and suddenly, you fear losing her not to disease, but to someone whose calves don't look like overcooked dumplings. You don't ask her directly. Of course not. You mutter vague questions like, "Funny how some people always have time to thatch, isn't it?" She blinks. Are we talking about the roof or your brain? Touché. Mainstream historical fact. Infidelity among medieval peasants wasn't common only because of fear or virtue. It was largely due to logistics. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide, and absolutely no privacy. Most homes had one room. One room. If you tried anything scandalous, odds were, someone's grandmother was right there peeling onions. Still, you try to play detective. You follow her one evening when she goes to check on Elspeth's goat. You lurk in the shadows like a muddy owl. You trip on a root. Loudly. Millie turns around, completely unfazed. Are you stalking me or courting the goat? You clear your throat. Just making sure you were safe. You know. Bandits. There hasn't been a bandit here in 20 years. They could be quiet bandits. She stares. You shrink under her gaze. Historians still argue whether medieval marriages tolerated small romantic lapses or if betrayals led to pitchforks and banishment. Some court records show couples reconciling after affairs. Others show rather more creative revenge methods involving pig manure. But in your case, the problem isn't betrayal, it's fear. You fear being replaced, forgotten, or not enough. You love her so much it's making you stupid. So one evening, you finally say it. Not in a dramatic speech. Not in front of a fire. You say it while she's grinding flour and you're picking weevils out of the barley. Millie, do you still want to be with me? She pauses, wipes her hands, looks up. Are you daft? Probably. You think I'd survive a plague, 3 bundling nights, 2 near-death haycart accidents, and you're snoring just to leave? You blink. You are, she adds, the only man I've ever met who thinks carrot duck sculptures are romantic. You grin. That one was pretty good. It had fangs, love. Symbolic. She rolls her eyes. I don't want the thatcher. He uses sheep's milk in his hair and smells like smugness. You laugh. A real one. The kind that shakes the dust out of your ribs. She softens. But if you ever follow me again like a creepy badger, I will throw a beat at you. Fair. Quirky tidbit. In some medieval villages, couples with trust issues sought help not from the priest, but from local folk rituals. One method involved baking symbolic bread with herbs said to bind the hearts. Another involved holding hands through a hole in a church wall. Honestly, your beat-based communication seems just as effective. The next morning, you wake to find a beat on your pillow. You smile. So you go back to trusting her, and more importantly, trusting yourself. You still get insecure sometimes. Still worry when she laughs a little too hard at someone else's joke. But you also remember that she picked you. Beats and all. And really, if someone ever does try to steal her, they'll have to get past your turnip dagger and emotional baggage first. Because this love? It's clumsy, but it's real. And you're not going anywhere. It begins with a craving. Millie sits up in bed one morning and whispers, I want pears. You, not yet awake and tangled in your own tunic, mumble, what kind of pears? Soft ones. Juicy. And not the kind that taste like despair. You blink. Then sit up straighter. Wait. Are you? She nods. Just a little. And your heart immediately launches into a victory jig. You leap out of bed, trip over a bucket, and yell, "You're going to need a pillow." Why? Unclear. You just feel the urge to provide one. It's happening. After all the hawthorn twigs, Elspeth's concoctions, the plague, the uncertainty, there's finally a baby on the way. You dance in the yard until the rooster flees in alarm. Now comes the terrifying part, surviving the next several months without panicking yourself into a second plague. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval pregnancy was a perilous journey. No ultrasounds, no vitamins, no epidurals, just herbs, prayer, and a whole lot of grit. Maternal mortality rates were shockingly high. So were infant deaths. But even so, babies were a sign of hope, of continuity, of legacy. You throw yourself into preparation. You gather extra firewood. You beg Elspeth for her cleanest straw. You barter a wooden spoon for a small pot of goose fat, for the skin, she says mysteriously. You even dig a trench around the hut to prevent flooding. Millie watches you do all this while sitting on an overturned bucket, eating pickled onions with a spoon. "You know," she says, "I'm the one doing the hard part." You hand her another onion. "I'm emotionally supervising." The first trimester is mostly nausea, complaints about your cooking, and unprovoked tears when the dog runs away. The dog comes back 3 hours later. Millie still cries. One day, she weeps over a collapsed cake made of barley and apples. "It looked so hopeful," she sobs. You pat her shoulder with deep concern. You tell her you'll bake another one. You lie. You cannot bake. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, pregnant women were advised to avoid looking at ugly animals or deformed vegetables, for fear it would imprint the baby with bad features. Millie interprets this as a ban on Bert, the miller's son, and tells him to stay 50 paces away until further notice. You finally start preparing names. You vote for Oswin. Millie suggests anything but Oswin. You propose Felicity. She says, "Are you naming a nun?" So you settle into a compromise. You'll wait to see the baby first and then argue over whose cousin was worse. Meanwhile, you visit the priest, partly for advice, partly because you're terrified. He blesses your home, mutters something about "be fruitful and multiply," and gives you a small bottle of holy water. You carry it around like a good luck charm, until it leaks in your pocket. You try to stay calm. Really. But every time Millie sneezes, you flinch. Every time she grunts while standing up, you leap to her side like a squirrel on espresso. She finally tells you to sit down or faint quietly. The other villagers start gifting you small items, a hand-stitched cloth, a carved rattle, dried herbs to keep the evil eye away. One old woman gives you a smooth stone and says, "Place this under her bed. It soothes the womb." You nod. You're not sure how rocks and reproductive systems go together, but you're not asking questions anymore. Then comes the labor. It starts in the middle of the night. Millie shakes you awake with a grip that could crush stone. "It's time," she growls. You leap out of bed and run outside. Then you remember you have zero idea what to do. Fortunately, Elspeth is already at your door. You never summoned her. She just knew. You're starting to think she's more owl than human. You're kicked out of the hut. Apparently, your job is to hover uselessly outside and look concerned while the women take over. You pace. You pray. You consider chewing bark to pass the time. At one point, you attempt to whittle a toy and accidentally carve something that looks like a diseased boot. Then, silence. Followed by a high-pitched, glorious, furious wail. Elspeth opens the door and says, "You have a daughter. She's loud. Like her mother." You stagger inside. Millie is pale and sweaty and radiant. The baby is swaddled and pink and, yes, very loud. You lean in, unsure of what to say. Millie whispers, "She looks like a turnip." She's perfect. You've never felt more proud, more terrified, or more like crying and laughing at the same time. You're a father. Somehow, you hold the baby. She grabs your finger. You melt. Historians still argue whether medieval peasant fathers played a major role in child-rearing or just left it to the mothers and midwives. But here you are, rocking her in your arms, already worrying about fleas and firewood and whether her nose is a normal size. You name her Matilda. Not after a saint. After the only person you both agreed didn't smell like cheese. You sleep that night in short, joyful bursts. Every cry sends you bolt upright. Every breath feels like a miracle. You're tired. You're overwhelmed. But you're not alone. You've got a family. And that changes everything. Matilda is 6 months old when the festival comes around again. The spring one with the ribbons, the bonfire, and the terrible cider that tastes like regret in a mug. Millie insists you both go. We need to remember what life was like before we only spoke in lullabies and goat bleats. You nod, bleary-eyed, clutching a pouch full of boiled peas for the baby. You haven't slept more than 3 hours in a row since her birth. You've started hallucinating conversations with tree bark. But sure, let's party. You dress in your cleanest tunic, which is to say, the one with only one questionable stain, and Millie braids her hair with wildflowers. You swear you've never seen her look more alive. Even with Matilda drooling down her back. The village green is buzzing. Children shriek, someone's chasing a pig, and the fiddler already 3 mugs in. You hold Millie's hand, dodging mud puddles and relatives who want to pinch the baby and comment on her sturdy lungs. You spot Bert trying to juggle turnips near the maypole. It ends poorly, as expected. The May Day festival is, technically, a fertility celebration. There's dancing, symbolic ribbons, and awkward flirty games involving blindfolds and far too much accidental groping. Mainstream historical fact: May Day in medieval Europe was a raucous mix of pagan tradition and Christian veneer. Young people might sneak off into the woods for greenwood marriages, unofficial unions sometimes accepted by the community if a baby arrived 9 months later. It was love, freedom, and chaos, often all at once. You and Millie take turns holding Matilda while the other tries to dance. You quickly discover that fatherhood has done terrible things to your rhythm. You trip. Twice. A child throws a flower crown at your face. Everyone laughs. Then someone starts the kissing game. Here's how it works. You wear a flower crown, close your eyes, and spin. When you stop, you kiss whoever's standing in front of you. Romantic. Debatable. Unsanitary? Definitely. Millie gets pulled in by her cousins. She rolls her eyes at you over her shoulder, grinning. You laugh. She spins. The crowd cheers. And she stops right in front of the Thatcher. You freeze. Millie blinks. The Thatcher grins, and it's the kind of grin you'd like to see disappear into a swamp. Then, before anyone can process it, the Thatcher swoops in and plants a very theatrical kiss on Millie's cheek. The crowd hoots. Someone starts clapping. Matilda burps dramatically. And you burn. Not just with jealousy, but with the sudden, irrational fury of a man who slept 2 hours a night for half a year, and now just watched another man kiss his wife while wearing your flower crown. You march up. Not thinking. Not breathing. Just acting. Nice kiss. You mutter. Need a napkin? He shrugs. Just a game. Millie is clearly about to step in, but you, genius that you are, decide this is the moment to challenge the Thatcher to something. Anything. Your mouth moves faster than your common sense. I bet you can't even thatch a straight ridge. The crowd gasps like you just insulted his mother and his ox in one sentence. You've never seen the Thatcher angry before. It's unsettling. Like watching a loaf of bread grow teeth. He shoves you, lightly, but enough. You stumble backward into the maypole. The ribbons tangle around your leg. You fall. Into the pie table. Cherry filling. Everywhere. The silence is loud. Then Millie says, "That's my husband." The pastry night. The crowd erupts in laughter. Someone throws a napkin at you. You lie there, sticky, humiliated, but also strangely triumphant. Because when you stand up, Millie is already at your side, wiping jam off your chin with the sleeve of her dress. She says, "You absolute radish." You say, "He kissed your cheek." She says, "And you kissed a custard tart with your whole body." Quirky tidbit. In some areas, public humiliation was considered part of festival tradition. Men were dunked in water troughs, chased by geese, or mock-flogged with birch branches. It was all in good fun, allegedly. Today, your humiliation is mostly custard-based. Later that night, you sit by the dying embers of the bonfire with Millie and a dozing Matilda. Your sleeve still smells like pastry. Millie leans into you. "You didn't have to defend my honor," she says. "I didn't," you reply. "I was defending my crown. And maybe a little bit of your cheek." She laughs. "Next time, aim for the meat pies. They're softer." You look up at the stars, holding your small, warm family close. You're not the best dancer. You're definitely not the best fighter. But you show up. You stay. You get covered in food when necessary. And really, that's what love looks like in your life. Sticky. Stumbling. But always, always standing up again. You wake the next morning with custard in your ear and a bruised ego in your chest. Millie spends the first hour giggling whenever she looks at you. Even Matilda seems amused, though she's mainly chewing her own fist. Still, nothing lingers too long in a medieval village. There's always work to be done, and yours today involves helping Elspeth gather herbs from the woods. She's offered you a few extra bundles of mugwort in exchange, and you're not about to turn down free plant-based compensation. As you walk, Elspeth is quieter than usual. You assume it's the early hour, or maybe her cat is planning something devious. Then she stops, crouches beside a patch of yarrow, and says softly, "You know Agnes? The baker's niece." You nod. Red hair. Always smelled faintly of warm flour and smoke. "She's been accused," Elspeth says. "Of what?" "Witchcraft." You blink. "Because she dreams of foxes. And her neighbor's cow gave sour milk." That's it. She also walks alone at night. And someone heard her humming near the well. You stare. "I hum near the well." "You're not red-headed and mysterious," Elspeth mutters. Mainstream historical fact. Accusations of witchcraft often arose in times of stress, bad harvests, disease, or unexplained misfortunes. And more often than not, it was women, especially those who lived independently or knew a bit too much about herbs, who bore the brunt. By noon, the village is buzzing. Agnes has been brought to the center square, pale but proud. She's tied to a post, not burning, thank the saints, just being questioned by the Reeve and Father Oswald. You arrive with a basket of firewood and the horrible realization that you've definitely spoken to Agnes, and maybe once gave her a goose feather for luck. Millie joins you, holding Matilda, eyes narrowed. Agnes is accused of making someone's tooth fall out with a glance, of spoiling milk, of dancing barefoot by the moonlight. Scandalous. You exchange a worried glance with Millie. Because here's the thing, Agnes has looked at you. She once complimented your boots. She borrowed onions from Millie. And now, suddenly, you're calculating how long it would take for those minor details to be twisted into testimony. "I should say something," you whisper. Millie grabs your arm. "You'll only make it worse." Historians still argue whether villagers genuinely believed in the supernatural or just used witchcraft accusations as social weapons, revenge, envy, scapegoating. In truth, it was probably both. People feared what they didn't understand, and they loved to whisper. You watch Agnes speak calmly, even as the Reeve snarls questions. "Did you curse John the cobbler's chickens? Did you cause that thunderstorm? Do you consort with woodland spirits? She answers plainly, firmly, never flinching. But every word seems to feed the fire, not quell it. Then, someone calls your name. Bert. Of course it's Bert. You used to speak with her, didn't you? He says loudly. She always liked you. Every eye turns your way. You smile weakly. She bought bread from me once. She gave you something, he adds, triumphantly. You blink. It was a thistle. She said it looked like my hair. The Reeve scowls. A thistle. Millie, calm as a monk, steps forward. He gave her onions. She gave him a weed. If that's witchcraft, then half the village is doomed. Laughter ripples through the crowd. The tension shifts. Someone mutters that Agnes made excellent pies, which hardly seems evil. The Reeve sighs, clearly disappointed he won't get to shout the word sorcery in public today. Father Oswald mumbles something about keeping an eye out. Agnes is untied and led away. You exhale. Later, you thank Millie. She shrugs. Bert's a pest. And I'm not letting you get accused of dark magic before breakfast. Still, the event lingers. You walk carefully now. You speak softer. Because you've seen how quickly love, or even kindness, can be twisted into suspicion. Quirky tidbit: some villages used bizarre witch tests, throwing the accused into water to see if they floated, a sign of guilt, or examining them for a witch's teat. These were desperate, brutal attempts to control a world they couldn't understand. You're grateful your village, while suspicious, hasn't yet taken to dunking people in barrels. Back home, you hold Matilda a little tighter. You kiss Millie's forehead while she pretends not to like it. And you whisper a quiet thank you to the saints for letting reason win, just this once. Because love in your world isn't just about affection. It's about protection, shielding the ones you care about from fear, from gossip, from the madness of crowds. And sometimes, that means standing still when everything in you wants to fight. That night, the wind howls through the trees. But your hearth stays warm. And your family, for now, stays safe. You wake the next morning with custard in your ear and a bruised ego in your chest. Millie spends the first hour giggling whenever she looks at you. Even Matilda seems amused, though she's mainly chewing her own fist. Still, nothing lingers too long in a medieval village. There's always work to be done, and yours today involves helping Elspeth gather herbs from the woods. She's offered you a few extra bundles of mugwort in exchange, and you're not about to turn down free plant-based compensation. As you walk, Elspeth is quieter than usual. You assume it's the early hour, or maybe her cat is planning something devious. Then she stops, crouches beside a patch of yarrow, and says softly, "You know Agnes? The baker's niece." You nod. Red hair. Always smelled faintly of warm flour and smoke. She's been accused, Elspeth says. Of what? Witchcraft. You blink. Because she dreams of foxes. And her neighbor's cow gave sour milk. That's it. She also walks alone at night. And someone heard her humming near the well. You stare. I hum near the well. You're not red-headed and mysterious, Elspeth mutters. Mainstream historical fact. Accusations of witchcraft often arose in times of stress, bad harvests, disease, or unexplained misfortunes. And more often than not, it was women, especially those who lived independently or knew a bit too much about herbs, who bore the brunt. By noon, the village is buzzing. Agnes has been brought to the center square, pale but proud. She's tied to a post, not burning, thank the saints, just being questioned by the Reeve and Father Oswald. You arrive with a basket of firewood and the horrible realization that you've definitely spoken to Agnes, and maybe once gave her a goose feather for luck. Millie joins you, holding Matilda, eyes narrowed. Agnes is accused of making someone's tooth fall out with a glance, of spoiling milk, of dancing barefoot by the moonlight. Scandalous. You exchange a worried glance with Millie. Because here's the thing, Agnes has looked at you. She once complimented your boots. She borrowed onions from Millie. And now, suddenly, you're calculating how long it would take for those minor details to be twisted into testimony. I should say something, you whisper. Millie grabs your arm. You'll only make it worse. Historians still argue whether villagers genuinely believed in the supernatural or just used witchcraft accusations as social weapons, revenge, envy, scapegoating. In truth, it was probably both. People feared what they didn't understand, and they loved to whisper. You watch Agnes speak calmly, even as the Reeve snarls questions. Did you curse John the cobbler's chickens? Did you cause that thunderstorm? Do you consort with woodland spirits? She answers plainly, firmly, never flinching. But every word seems to feed the fire, not quell it. Then, someone calls your name. Bert. Of course it's Bert. You used to speak with her, didn't you? He says loudly. She always liked you. Every eye turns your way. You smile weakly. She bought bread from me once. She gave you something, he adds, triumphantly. You blink. It was a thistle. She said it looked like my hair. The Reeve scowls. A thistle. Millie, calm as a monk, steps forward. He gave her onions. She gave him a weed. If that's witchcraft, then half the village is doomed. Laughter ripples through the crowd. The tension shifts. Someone mutters that Agnes made excellent pies, which hardly seems evil. The Reeve sighs, clearly disappointed he won't get to shout the word sorcery in public today. Father Oswald mumbles something about keeping an eye out. Agnes is untied and led away. You exhale. Later, you thank Millie. She shrugs. Bert's a pest. And I'm not letting you get accused of dark magic before breakfast. Still, the event lingers. You walk carefully now. You speak softer. Because you've seen how quickly love, or even kindness, can be twisted into suspicion. Quirky tidbit: some villages used bizarre witch tests, throwing the accused into water to see if they floated, a sign of guilt, or examining them for a witch's teat. These were desperate, brutal attempts to control a world they couldn't understand. You're grateful your village, while suspicious, hasn't yet taken to dunking people in barrels. Back home, you hold Matilda a little tighter. You kiss Millie's forehead while she pretends not to like it. And you whisper a quiet thank you to the saints for letting reason win, just this once. Because love in your world isn't just about affection. It's about protection, shielding the ones you care about from fear, from gossip, from the madness of crowds. And sometimes, that means standing still when everything in you wants to fight. That night, the wind howls through the trees. But your hearth stays warm. And your family, for now, stays safe. The morning after the haystack debacle and your now famous public apology, you notice something different. The world feels slower. Not in a lazy way. There's still firewood to chop, pigs to scold, and Matilda to keep from chewing on live coals, but in a way that makes you aware of time. Aware that you're not the same lovesick dunce handing out leeks by the well anymore. You're older. Your back cracks more. Your laugh lines deepen. Your knees have opinions. And then it hits you, you're a widower. Not literally, thank goodness. Millie is very much alive and currently yelling at a goose. But you're not young anymore. You're just midlife, mid-marriage, mid-everything. And when you visit the market later that week, you notice the shift for real. Because an actual widow starts flirting with you. Her name's Joan. She's toothless, wears 12 shawls, and is in possession of a cider jug that may contain more vinegar than actual cider. She pats your hand and says, "You've still got shoulders. That's rare these days." You thank her. You back away. Quickly. That night, you tell Millie. She nearly chokes on her soup. She touched your hand. You nod solemnly. She must be desperate. You consider throwing a spoon at her, but settle for mild sulking. Mainstream historical fact. Widowhood was a frequent state for many women and men in medieval Europe due to short life expectancies, disease, childbirth dangers, and the general hazards of existing. Widows often remarried, not always for love, but for security, companionship, and sometimes cider-related arrangements. You begin to notice all the other widows in town. They congregate like judgmental ravens. They share news. And they all look at you. You're not sure why. Is it the shoulders? The reputation? The haystack fame? You confide in Elspeth. She sips tea. They like men who can string words together and don't smell like salted fish. That's a rare combination. I smell like beeswax. Exactly. You start walking around the village with a slight hunch. Maybe if you shrink your shoulders, they'll lose interest. But it only makes you look mysterious. One day, Widow Joan brings you an old pie. You're unsure whether it's a gift, a weapon, or a coded message. You thank her and leave it on a stump. That night, a raccoon eats it and dies. You take that as divine intervention. Quirky tidbit. In some parts of Europe, widows had more legal freedom than married women. They could own property, run businesses, and make choices without their husband's approval. A second marriage, however, often meant giving up that autonomy. So when they flirted, it wasn't always serious. Sometimes it was just fun. Still, you start to wonder, if something did happen to Millie, what then? You shudder. Not because of the cider widow army, though that's part of it, but because the idea of Millie being gone is unthinkable. Her smirk. Her lectures about washing your feet. Her tendency to stack firewood in height order for aesthetics. It's all part of your world now. You realize you're not afraid of dying. You're afraid of staying without her. One evening, you sit beside Millie after Matilda's asleep, watching the embers fade. Do you ever think about a later? You ask. Later like dinner? Or later like death? The second one. She shrugs. I plan to outlive everyone out of sheer spite. Even Matilda? Oh, she'll inherit my sass and live forever. We'll bicker across generations. You smile. She adds, you'll be buried in your best tunic. Which means I should probably wash it now, just in case. You both laugh. Historians still argue whether love between peasants deepened with age or if familiarity simply replaced affection. But you know, love doesn't fade. It shifts. Like the seasons. Like your back when you bend over too fast. You're not as quick now. Your jokes aren't new. But your love. It's steady, quiet, deep. Later that week, you see Widow Joan again. She waves, then points at a passing shepherd instead. You breathe easier. That night, Millie surprises you with a new pair of socks. Thicker. For winter. You don't cry. You just nod, pull them on, and whisper, "These are serious socks." She replies, "So don't die in them." And you won't. Not yet. You've got time left. And love left. And plenty of firewood to stack crookedly. And in your world, that's as close to peace as anyone ever gets. It's Midsummer's Eve, the sky still glowing at the edges even after the sun sinks, the air warm and thick with the scent of crushed grass and too much cider. There's music, of course, someone with a lute who knows 4 chords and isn't afraid to repeat them. Children twirl like uncoordinated moths, and the whole village seems lit from within. You, however, are wrestling with your trousers. Not metaphorically. Literally. There's hay lice in them. Again. Just burn them, Millie suggests as she picks knits from your collar like a very affectionate monkey. You sigh, scratch, and carry on, because tonight, no matter the itching, you are going to dance. It's tradition. Midsummer means fire, wishes, and just a hint of poor decision-making. You weren't going to bother, honestly. You're tired. Your back has ideas about revolting. But Millie gave you that look, the one that says, try to be fun for once before we both die of boredom. So here you are. Matilda's with your sister for the evening, being plied with honey and stories of saints who probably didn't exist. You've got one night, just one, to remember that you're still alive. Mainstream historical fact. Midsummer celebrations go way back. Pagan bonfires, leaping flames to ensure fertility, herbs collected for magic, and wild dances that probably led to more than a few surprise weddings 9 months later. Even after Christianization, people still used it as a night to let loose. After all, the crops were planted and the ale was flowing. You stand awkwardly at the edge of the clearing while Millie ties a ribbon in her hair. "Don't stand like you're about to be knighted by a donkey," she says. "You straighten." "I was going for charming." "You're going for gouty." "You offer your hand anyway." She takes it. The music starts, an uneven, joyful mess, and you move in a circle, stomping, spinning, bumping into people who mostly laugh and shove back. Millie's hair catches the firelight like molten wool. Her cheeks flush. You haven't seen her laugh like this in weeks. You try to keep up, but the dancing gets wild. The circle breaks. Someone leaps over the fire, successfully. Someone else tries and immediately regrets it. You and Millie move to the sidelines, panting, grinning, wiping sweat from your foreheads with your sleeves. You sit on an overturned bucket. She sits on you. "You still smell like beets," she says. "You still smell like wet rope." You kiss her. And not a married person kiss. Not a peck on the cheek. But an actual breath-stealing, we're still young enough to mean it, kind of kiss. Someone wolf whistles. You don't care. You're older now. Your hands are calloused, your back is a patchwork of aches, and your knees make a crunching sound when you kneel to weed the onions. But right now, here in the flickering dark, surrounded by smoke and laughter and the memory of who you were before the diapers and debts and spilled porridge, you feel alive again. Quirky tidbit. There was once a belief that if you gathered 9 types of flowers on Midsummer's Eve and placed them under your pillow, you'd dream of your future love. You consider trying it just to see if you still dream of Millie. But you already know the answer. The fire crackles low. The children start nodding off, one by one. Someone plays a lullaby on a whistle. You and Millie walk home slowly, shoes in hand, stars watching above. You pass the spot where you once left a carved duck turnip, where she called you hay for brains, where the thatcher got a mouthful of passive-aggressive beet. You pass the well, the haystack, still legendary, the old bundling hut. You've built a life here. Through storms, sickness, almost love triangle tragedies, and one very traumatic pie incident. Historians might debate the value of a peasant's love life. They'll write about dowries and law, about obligation and kinship charts. But they'll never know the exact sound Millie makes when she tries not to laugh. Or the way your chest swells every time she calls your name with that half-annoyed, half-affectionate tone that only you get. As you reach the threshold of your hut, she turns to you and says, "If I get lice from that dance, I'm blaming your socks." You grin. You're welcome. You step inside. The straw creaks. The fire is low. The night is warm. And so you sleep, curled beside the woman who once accepted a love letter written on bark, in a home you thatched yourself, with a baby who drools like a champion and dreams of geese. You don't know what comes next. But you've survived this far. And that's enough. Wind down, 300 words. The night is quiet now. The fire's faded to amber embers, soft and slow. Outside, the crickets sing in a rhythm older than any history book. Inside, the straw mattress sighs beneath your weight. Millie is already breathing evenly, one arm draped across your ribs. You can hear Matilda's faint snuffles from the corner, gentle, dream-bound sounds that make the shadows feel less lonely. Your hands rest still, no longer calloused by axe or broom. Just warm. Just resting. Just holding. You think of all the days before, when love meant glances and turnips, when you were half boy, half hunger, when everything was a maybe. Now, the maybes are fewer. You've loved, and stumbled, and loved again. You've watched someone weep over cake, bury friends, flirt with herbs and disasters. You've learned that love isn't always about grand passion. Sometimes, it's just staying, stirring the pot, hauling the water, saying, I'm here, 100 ways without words. And now the wind shifts through the trees like a lullaby. The shutters creak. The ashes settle. You're home. So let yourself breathe deeper. Let the warmth settle in your limbs. Let the story ebb into stillness. There's no rush. The dancing's done. The love remains. Sleep well, dream deeply, and don't worry about the lice.